Joining me now is Congressman Jim Himes from Connecticut, who serves as the ranking member on the House Intelligence Committee. Representative Himes, thank you for being with me tonight. This is sort of an extraordinary story. One of the things that really stuck out to me is that the conservative influencers that RT wanted to hire were all conservatives. Benny Johnson, Tim Pool, David Rubin, Matt Christensen, Tyler Hansen, and Lauren Southern. What conclusions are you drawing here between the desire of Russians to recruit influencers and the fact that they were all conservatives?
Well, I'm not at all surprised for two reasons. Number one, and I don't know if conservative is the right word, right? When you say conservative, I think, Liz Cheney and Ronald Reagan, who were pretty clear on Russia. This is a much more radical thing. I would call it MAGA, right? MAGA, following, of course, their cult leaders' instructions and example, love Vladimir Putin. He's an unconstrained dictator. He's not checked in any way. He's not balanced in any way. And they just love that, the way Donald Trump did when he was president. So that's point one. And then point two, the other reason I'm not surprised is because, if you look at the left and the right today, you can look at the left and say, gosh, I don't agree with their position on Gaza. I don't agree with their position on the Green New Deal. I don't agree with their position on single-payer health care, if that's the way you think. But those are policy positions. On the far right, of course, you have January 6th, the attack on the Capitol. You have election denialism. You have all of the things that the Russians hope to grow in our society, which is chaos. You got page 3 of the indictment. You will see that the objective is there in black and white. Of course, it's to reelect Donald Trump, but chaos is in the service of Vladimir Putin telling the world that democracy simply doesn't work.
In all of this, the influencers themselves are saying they had no idea Russian money was behind this. The Tennessee-based company that cut the checks effectively is saying we had no idea it was Russian money that was behind this. But the indictment, curiously includes some detail, like the founder of this Tennessee-based company searching in Google, what time is it in Moscow, and saying things like, so we're billing the Russians from the corporation, right? I mean, that to me sounds like they understood there was some Russian aspect to all of this. Are you buying the pleas of ignorance?
No, I actually read, and, I can't confirm that this is Tenet. I'm sort of responding to that, the same way others are. If you read the statement by Tenet, they're like, oh, nothing to see here. Lots of CYA, wasn't our fault. We didn't know. I mean, look, we'll find out over time. What worries me, Alex, is that this is not an isolated example. As the ranking member of the Intelligence Committee, I get fairly frequent briefings on the efforts of the Russians. This will not be the last story. There are other concerns, I should say, not to reveal anything out there. And as a result, look, I think two things need to happen. Maybe Tenet didn't know what was going on, but you know what? We make banks research their clients, right? It's, people need to do the work to make sure that they are not acting on the part of the Kremlin. It shouldn't be that hard. And then secondarily, I would say this to all of my fellow Americans, in a very polarized time. If you are looking at something, oh, my goodness, look at Zelensky's wife has a yacht in the Mediterranean. The Greeks understood this. Show a little skepticism. If you show no skepticism, if you just suck that stuff up because it confirms your political beliefs, we're going to get the democracy that we deserve, and it won't be a democracy.
Well, I do wonder, though, there are also people that are effectively creating Kremlin propaganda on their own. The Kremlin's aware of what Tucker Carlson was doing in Russian grocery stores, which was basically cutting a video for Vladimir Putin. And that's not because Tucker Carlson was necessarily on the Kremlin payroll. That's just because that's where Tucker Carlson's politics are right now. You have a party that is coalesced around autocrats and dictators. And I sort of wonder what the Republican reaction in Congress has been to these revelations, that the party, to use the phrase useful idiots, right? They are being manipulated either wittingly or unwittingly to be puppets of the Russian dictator.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole other category of things, right? We've been talking about, people who are actually being paid by the Russians to serve the interest of the Russians. You are right, and I sort of alluded to this before. The right wing, elements of the right wing, certainly elements of MAGA, just can't get enough of Russia. They just love Russia, and I think that has to do with a sort of natural authoritarian tendency. But at the end of the day, look, Tucker Carlson, J.D. Vance, who says we should not send any more aid to Ukraine. These are opinions, policy opinions that are protected by the First Amendment. So it's a very different thing. But just because they're protected by the First Amendment doesn't mean that American voters should think about who Tucker Carlson has supported, should think about the opinions of J.D. Vance and whether they're consistent with, generations of conservative thinking in this country that said that the United States has a special role to play in standing up for democracy and against dictators.
We have talked mostly about Russia and conservatives, but the reality is, and the New York Times has done extensive reporting on this, China and Iran are also very, very engaged in American politics. And I guess, you suggested that there would be more to come. You get briefings on this. I mean, how concerned are you broadly about the integrity of our elections at this point, given the opportunities for chicanery at best, full-on misinformation campaigns designed to destabilize, the leading democracy in the globe?
So I have very few worries about the integrity of the systems, right? We have a very fragmented electoral machine in this country. There's not one big computer that tallies all the votes. It's done by, towns, by counties. I have very few doubts. I have almost no doubt that the integrity of the actual mechanics will be fine. By the way, it is, voter fraud is also a vanishingly small phenomenon. You can count on, a couple of hands the number of people who go in and vote illegally, despite the fact that the Republicans are going to spend a whole bunch of time next week, apparently, trying to create yet another law that would make what is already illegal even more illegal, which is, people who aren't entitled to vote voting. Now, what I do worry about is what we've been talking about. We're an open society. We're an open media society. People have First Amendment rights. That means it's really pretty easy for bad folks abroad who don't have First Amendment rights to manipulate individual voters. That's where the danger lies. And look, we're going to do everything. You just saw a great example of the federal government all over a huge problem. But at the end of the day, responsibility for being good, critical participants in a democracy lies with the citizens of that democracy. So it's my job to do oversight of the FBI and the NSA and the CIA, and I'm going to keep doing that. But I promise you, Alex, if individual citizens can't be critical thinkers, can't be a little skeptical about the immense amount of BS that circulates online, we'll lose our democracy.
Be skeptical, says Congressman Jim Himes from the great state of Connecticut. Wise words. Thank you for your time tonight, sir. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Alex.